At the moment, I would say that these are two of the most popular retro style professional cameras. So here is my Fuji X-T5 with the 27mm f2.8 pancake lens. This is a camera that I've owned now for 2.5 years. And this is the Nikon ZF with the 40mm f2. And I've had this camera now for a little over 4 months. Both of them have a super robust line of lenses to go along with them. Great autofocus, they both have dual card slots, and they both have styling and a body design that is a little bit of a throwback to the film days. More of an angular kind of boxy design. Both have these very analog looking command dials on top of the camera, as well as just like a less kind of plasticky feel overall than some other modern professional cameras. And it's obvious just looking at both of these why the appeal is so huge. They're both really, really beautiful cameras. Before we jump in, I do want to say that this video is not sponsored in any way by Fuji or Nikon. I purchased all the gear in this video with my own money, and all the opinions are my own. As an owner of pretty much every X-T line camera since the X-T2, it's obvious that I'm a massive fan of this particular line of Fujifilm cameras, but I thought it would be an interesting comparison to the ZF since there's one key difference here between these two, and that is the sensor size. The X-T line of cameras have always been an APS-C sensor, and the ZF is a full frame sensor. So this does make a difference when it comes to depth of field and also the size and weight of the camera. So the Nikon being a full frame, it's a much bigger and heavier camera. But when it comes to image quality, there is very little difference between APS-C sensors and full frame sensors. Some APS-C will outperform full frame, some full frame will outperform APS-C. It really just depends on what sensor is inside the particular camera that you're talking about. In some cases, a very slight advantage for full frame sensors when you're talking about low light performance. But again, it's going to depend on which sensor you're actually talking about. Comparing these two specific sensors, the X-T5 actually has a much higher resolution sensor. It's a 40 megapixel sensor, whereas the ZF is 24 megapixels. And this is really only going to become apparent if you're doing any heavy cropping of the image. As photographers, most of our work is going to be shown in a lower resolution than what we captured it in. So for example, if you're publishing to web, it is just not sustainable to upload full resolution images. And even when you're printing your images, you're going to have to be looking at a very big print, and you're gonna have to be quite close to it in order to see the difference between this kind of difference in megapixels. But specs aside, I do prefer talking about handling and build quality. So first off, we're going to talk about the ZF. And I've actually only had this camera for 4 months, so do take that into consideration. But honestly, this camera feels like a brick. It's a really rigid sort of feel in the hands. The screen itself is probably the most impressive thing, and it feels really, really well built. The hinge on the screen feels super heavy duty, and this is usually a pretty big point of failure on many cameras after long-term use. The dials and switches and the buttons on the camera also feel very similar to the screen. Even the on-off switch at the top of the camera takes a little bit of force to actually switch it on. It just feels really solid overall, which I really like. This camera honestly feels as good or better than some of the classic retro cameras from 50 years ago. And like they say, it's actually true. They just don't make them like they used to. But for the ZF, in the time that I've had it, I'm kind of thinking that this might be an exception to that rule. And the ZF is also weather sealed. And I just realized that I've been saying ZF this whole time. I told myself for this review, I'm going to say ZF so I don't annoy everyone, but I guess that ship has sailed, and I'm sorry if ZF annoys you guys. But that is a point of similarity for the X-T5. This camera is also fully weather sealed. I've owned the majority of the X-T line of cameras, and I have never really had build quality issues at all. And I've taken these cameras all over the world, namely the X-T2 and the X-T3, I think were the ones that I traveled with the most. And they were definitely subjected to some pretty rough weather conditions, and they seem to hold up great. This one in particular is 2.5 years old, and apart from, you know, just a few scuffs here and there on the exterior, this is a full magnesium alloy body, by the way. And those scuffs are from using a strap that doesn't have those like plastic protector thingies, so it's mainly my fault. The only thing that I can really say about this camera is when I tilt out the screen, sometimes it kind of makes a squeaking noise. There is this like exposed ribbon cable underneath the tilt screen, and I used to see that as like a point of weakness, but I've honestly never really had an issue with ribbon cables failing or anything like that. Anything to do with these screens, it's been solid. So honestly, between these two cameras in the hand, I'd say that the ZF feels slightly better, although it could be just the fact that everything is a little bit more rigid, a little bit more stiff, and the camera is heavier overall. I'd really have to come back to both of them in maybe a year or two's time to really give an accurate assessment of how they've held up over time. But as a conclusion on build quality on both of these cameras compared, I would say that they both get a tick of approval. Obviously, these cameras do have different styles of tilt screen. So on the X-T5, you've got this tilt, and it does not flip out to the side like the ZF does. It can also tilt in the vertical shooting mode. So that's really cool as well. Not every camera can do that. Not every screen can do that. I think this is just a matter of preference. I know some people prefer a flip screen. Other people prefer a tilt screen like this one. I'm kind of indifferent. I slightly lean towards a flip out screen. I don't know why. Maybe that's just more cameras that I've owned have had a flip out screen, so I'm more used to that. But I'd be interested to know, what do you guys think down in the comment section below? Let me know, do you prefer the tilt screen or the flip out screen? The two cameras both have dual SD card slots, but there is a key difference here because the X-T5 has two full-size SD card slots, whereas the Nikon has a full-size SD and then a micro SD. This is a bit of a win for the X-T5 because it's definitely preferable to have full-size SD cards over micro SD cards. Micro SDs are a little bit less reliable and they're a little bit worse at heat dissipation. But honestly, I'm just glad that it has dual card slots because it's definitely better to have a backup regardless of what format it is than to just have a single SD card slot. And this is one of those things that a lot of people say rules a camera out from being a professional camera, is that if it has a single SD card slot, there's no room for error, there's no redundancy, and the risk of losing files, especially when you're doing client jobs, is there with the single SD card slot. But with a dual SD card slot, obviously two cards would have to fail at the same time, which is super rare. As already mentioned, sensor size is the big difference here, and this again is going to be personal preference. For the X-T5, as a trade-off, you get a smaller and lighter body itself and smaller, more compact lenses. For the ZF, you're going to be dealing with a much larger setup if you went with a standard zoom or with Nikon's premium lenses with large apertures. Having said that, if you go for these 1.4 primes from Nikon, so here I've got 35 1.4 and 50 1.4, these are actually quite compact for what they are. Not as small and compact as the Fuji 1.4 primes, they're actually quite lightweight and compact. Yes, these are not the premium S line lenses, so they're not the absolute pinnacle of image quality, but for me to carry two 1.4 prime lenses around with me with that full frame depth of field, I do really love the form factor of these lenses. One trend that we've been seeing a lot lately is photographers opting to have a stylized, publishable image straight out of the camera with no editing required. And while you definitely could post a straight out of camera image from any camera previously with just the JPEG from the camera, you never really had much control over the look. You could adjust things like contrast, saturation, but there was very limited adjustment there. Both cameras give you the ability to have stylized images saved as a JPEG straight out of camera. Fujifilm most famously with their film simulations, and then you get control over things like highlight, shadow, saturation. You can add grain, increase dynamic range with the DR200 and DR400 settings. And Nikon does do something fairly similar, but actually with a lot more control. But it doesn't happen inside the camera body itself. Preset looks in camera are a little heavy-handed and in my opinion, a little bit dated. And the real power comes in when you use this software from Nikon called NX Studio, which is a raw processing app that allows you to create a preset and then save that preset as a custom profile to the camera. And then from there, you can shoot in that profile and save JPEGs with that color preset. And with this app, you can actually control so many aspects of how the image looks, including HSL, tweaking individual colors themselves, as well as like luma values. And if you really know what you're doing, you can get some really cool looking images straight out of camera. While I myself definitely prefer to edit all my photos in post, I still have had a decent play around with the NX Studio app, and I've been able to come up with a custom profile that I think looks a little bit better than those standard profiles, a little bit closer to what I would see as a final result of my image than the in-camera profiles. So I've definitely enjoyed using that to preview my images, but I could definitely see if I needed to quickly, send out a bunch of JPEGs, that would be something that I could definitely see myself doing with the ZF. There's also an online cloud platform that allows you to download and use custom profiles created by other photographers. So if you're not so confident with post editing, you can also explore those. However, I would argue that if you're in the market for one of these quite expensive, to be honest, cameras, then you probably already have some kind of experience with raw processing. While the Fuji profiles definitely have quite a large fan base at this point, it's definitely subjective. So if you do like the look of these film simulations, then that's obviously great. But if you want something a little bit more tailored to your style, then I actually really like the approach that Nikon has taken here. I think by far the best approach for straight out of camera JPEGs is just to allow for the import of a custom LUT like the Lumix cameras do. So I think I would definitely love to see the implementation of custom LUTs for either of these cameras. I think it would just make them so much more powerful when it comes to creating straight out of camera JPEGs. Let's talk about lens options. I think that the ZF and the X-T5 both have access to a really great range of lenses. I'd say that probably Fuji wins in this respect because the X mount has just been around for much longer than the Z mount. The Fuji just has so many solid options from Tamron, Sigma, even Viltrox as well have some awesome lenses. So I think just the sheer amount that they have, not just the native Fuji lenses, and they're all just such great quality. I think definitely Fuji for now has the upper hand. For the Z mount, I think that they've done a really good job to build out their lens lineup. And as I mentioned before, I actually really love those 1.4 primes. I love the approach they've taken with creating compact 1.4 primes. And so I'm really looking forward to trying out a few other Z mount lenses, not just from Nikon themselves, but also third-party ones. I actually recently used these cameras in tandem on a job for a fashion label. I shot a long lens on the Fuji X-T5 and a wide-angle prime on the Nikon. And the performance between these two cameras was really similar, to be honest. Even the battery life, I found that they were both very comparable when it comes to battery. At the end of the shoot, I think I took close to like 2,000 photos on each of these cameras respectively, and the remaining battery level was around the same. I also noticed that the autofocus was pretty similar in terms of accuracy and speed. For these kinds of shoots, I use a continuous autofocus setting with face and eye detection turned on, and both of them did a really great job, very sticky. They were able to keep up and nail the autofocus pretty much every time. Most of the time when I'm not shooting people, I'll be using a single autofocus point with the continuous tracking. So I will just hover the autofocus point over the area that I want to track and then recompose my shot. And I've found that the Fuji does a really great job, but one thing that I've noticed about the Nikon since I've had it is that it is really great at tracking subjects. With almost every other camera that I've used, including the X-T5, I've found that sometimes when you place the box over an object and then recompose your shot, that focus point kind of sometimes has a mind of its own and it can jump around the frame and move on to different objects. And that is something that I have noticed barely ever happens. I don't think it's ever happened to me with the ZF. So I'm actually really impressed with the autofocus performance of the ZF. Now I want to briefly touch on video, even though neither of these cameras are ones that I would reach to for shooting video. For me, when it comes to video, I'm definitely a Sony guy. So I'm currently filming right now on the ZV-E1. If you watch my channel, you know that I absolutely love this camera, and I have used Fuji in the past for video. So the X-T3 was my main video camera. I actually owned, I think, 2 or 3 of them at one point, and very solid camera when it comes to autofocus, image quality, all those things. And I'm sure that the X-T5 is great also, although I just honestly haven't used it that much. From the very limited amount of video that I've shot with both of these cameras, they both have a very solid, great looking image straight out of camera. There's not many drawbacks to both cameras. They can both shoot in a log profile, they both have 10-bit color, they can both shoot high frame rate. I think if you are a hybrid shooter, I think both options are very solid for video. I think another reason why I really wanted to make a comparison video between these two cameras is because they're actually really similar in terms of price. Of course, the price keeps changing and it might be completely different depending on when you're watching this video, but in some instances I found the X-T5 for a little bit cheaper, and then on some websites I found the Nikon a little bit cheaper. So they're pretty much neck and neck, and I would say that it's really going to be dependent on your personal preference or what you really want out of a camera. I would say that the Fuji it really does win in terms of portability, the size, the weight. This is such a great travel system, whereas the Nikon is just such good value for money for a full frame camera, given the capabilities that it has. It can also be quite a good travel camera. It's a pretty slim camera body itself, but it's definitely not the lightest camera that you can get. But then when you think about its build quality, the feature set, it's such great value for money in my honest opinion. So it's really going to come down to personal preference. Are you a JPEG shooter? Do you want more control over how the JPEGs look? Do you love the Fujifilm simulations and recipes? Do you want a smaller, more compact body overall? Is the micro SD card slot a deal breaker? Or maybe it just comes down to preference over the look of these cameras, because it is a big reason why you would pick up like a retro style camera, is because it just looks really cool. Are you thinking of buying a ZF or an X-T5, and which one are you thinking about leaning towards? Let me know down in the comment section below. As always, I want to thank you guys for sticking around for another video. If you like the way I edit my photos as well, I do have a profile, so I use that profile to edit all my photos that you would have seen throughout this video and on my Instagram, things like that. So if you do like that, I'll leave a link down in the description below. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next video.